In this video, we bring to you this inmate who is scheduled for execution on June 16th. Kindly subscribe to our channel to get more information on all the inmates in the United States of America. Stephen Stanko is a name that still echoes with discomfort, pain, and disbelief throughout South Carolina. For some, it represents a chilling betrayal. For others, it's a case that forces us to question the very boundaries of redemption. His story is not simple. It's tangled, tragic, and at its core, deeply human. As the scheduled execution date of June 13th approaches, we're left to unpack the layers of a man whose life promised something different but ended in bloodshed and heartbreak. Stephen Christopher Stanko was born in 1968. In many ways, he seemed like someone who could have taken a different path. He was intelligent, by all accounts, remarkably so. He read voraciously, spoke eloquently, and carried himself with a quiet, persuasive charm. People described him as polite, articulate, and thoughtful. And that's what makes his story so hard to process. Because Stephen didn't fit the mold of what most people expect a killer to be. But evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks in politely, shakes your hand, and smiles. Long before the world came to know his name for reasons no one ever should, Stanko had already served time. In 1996, he was convicted of kidnapping and assault. He spent almost 8 years behind bars. But in prison, something changed, or at least it seemed like it did. He immersed himself in books, history, and writing. He began to speak out about justice reform and rehabilitation. In fact, after his release in 2004, he co-authored a book called Living in Prison, giving readers a detailed look at life behind bars. It felt real. It felt authentic. For a moment, people believed him. He wasn't just speaking as a former inmate. He was speaking as someone who had supposedly lived through the worst and emerged better. He gave interviews, spoke to newspapers, and positioned himself as a man who had paid his dues and was ready to start over. People wanted to believe him. They always do with stories like his. He gave them hope that even after prison, even after darkness, there's still a way forward. But not every redemption story is real. Behind closed doors, there was another Stephen Stanko, a version of him that didn't disappear when the prison gates opened, a version capable of terrifying violence and cold calculation. Less than a year after his release, the world saw who he really was, and it was far worse than anyone imagined. It was April 8th, 2005. Stephen was living with a woman named Laura Ling in Horry County, South Carolina. Laura was 43 years old, a librarian and a mother. She was someone who saw good in people. Maybe she believed in second chances, or maybe she just saw a man trying to put his life back together. She let him into her home, into her life. But what happened next is something no one could have foreseen. That night, in the quiet of her home, Laura was murdered brutally. She was strangled and had her throat slashed. The violence was overwhelming and the betrayal unimaginable. But the horror didn't end there. Her teenage daughter, Andrea, was also in the house. She was attacked, left with severe injuries, and violated in the most horrific way. She survived, but what she endured would never leave her. These weren't crimes of desperation. They were deliberate and cruel, and after committing them, Stephen didn't stop. He ran. 2 days later, on April 10th, 2005, he struck again, this time in Georgetown County. His victim was Henry Turner, a 74-year-old businessman known and loved in his community. Just like Laura, he had opened his door to Stephen, offering a place of comfort and compassion. And just like Laura, he was repaid with death. Stanko beat him, stabbed him, and stole his car. Then, once again, he disappeared. The state of South Carolina was in shock. The man who had spoken so convincingly about change and rehabilitation had become the face of betrayal and violence. The manhunt that followed was massive, one of the biggest the state had seen in years. Authorities warned the public. Stephen Stanko was not only dangerous, he was calculating, and he had nothing left to lose. He was finally caught on April 12, 2005, in Augusta, Georgia. He was sitting in a restaurant, eating, as if nothing had happened. There was no sign of remorse, no fear, just a quiet indifference that chilled everyone who witnessed it. What followed was a trial that captured the attention of the entire country. Prosecutors painted a clear picture. Stephen Stanko was not just a man who snapped. He was a manipulator, a predator, and a cold-blooded killer. The evidence left little room for doubt. DNA, forensic reports, and the heartbreaking testimony of Andrea Ling, who had lived through the unthinkable. Stanko's defense argued that he suffered from mental illness. They brought in experts to discuss his neurological state, his past, and possible disorders. But while some psychologists noted antisocial tendencies and signs of personality disorders, none could claim he was legally insane when the murders happened. The jury was not convinced. The truth was too stark, and the pain too fresh. In 2006, Stephen Stanko was found guilty of the murders of Laura Ling and Henry Turner. He was also convicted of the attempted murder and assault of Andrea Ling. The court sentenced him to death. Since then, he has sat on death row in South Carolina, filing appeal after appeal. In his prison interviews, he often came across as emotionally distant, more interested in discussing the justice system than expressing sorrow for what he'd done. To many, that was proof of his inability or unwillingness to understand the gravity of his actions. To others, it was a chilling display of a man entirely detached from empathy. Now, as June 13th, 2025 draws near, we are left with hard questions. Not about his guilt, that part is clear, but about the system, about human nature, and about what we do with people like Stephen Stanko. Can people change? Should we ever trust again after a betrayal so deep? And for the families of the victims, for the ones who survived, what does justice look like? For Laura Ling, justice will never mean coming home. For Henry Turner, it will never mean seeing another sunrise. For Andrea Ling, justice means living with scars that can never fully heal. For them and so many others, June 13th may be a day of quiet resolution. Or maybe it's just another day without the people they loved. Stephen Stanko's story isn't just about crime. It's about trust broken, lives lost, and a man who wore two faces. As his execution nears, the world watches, not just to see a sentence carried out, but to remember the victims, and to ask ourselves what justice really means when nothing can bring back what was taken. This is the life of Stephen Stanko. Kindly subscribe to get more information on all the inmates.